Hello and welcome to Snail Story, where tales unfold slowly, yet touch the deepest corners of our hearts. Today, let's set aside all the noise because you're about to hear a very different journey. A powerful CEO, an heir, who once walked away from everything and the love that weathers the storms of power to finally find the simplest kind of peace. If you're ready, let's begin. That afternoon, the New York sky was weighed down by a heavy gray, reflecting Emma Collins' own exhaustion. After 3 grueling hours of heated debates with the board of directors, she just wanted to find a quiet place to breathe. Even her high heels felt heavier than usual as she stepped out of her Bentley. "Take Max and Luna there," Emma instructed her assistant, her voice calm but tinged with fatigue. "Yes, ma'am." "Blossom Haven is ready. They say their pet spa services are excellent." Blossom Haven, a plant care and pet spa tucked away in a quiet corner of the old town, barely noticeable amidst the city's chaos. Inside, a light scent of mint filled the air, blending with the refreshing green of dozens of hanging plants. Max, the golden retriever, wagged his tail eagerly. Luna, the white cat with piercing blue eyes, sat regally, calmly licking her soft fur like a little queen. Emma smiled at her beloved pets and pushed open the door. "Welcome to Blossom Haven." A warm, deep male voice greeted from inside. Emma looked up. The man standing before her was nothing like what she had imagined for a pet spa employee. He was tall, well-built, but dressed simply in a beige polo shirt and khaki pants. His deep brown eyes carried a calm, unreadable steadiness. "I'm Daniel," he nodded gently. "It's a pleasure to care for Max and Luna today." Emma raised an eyebrow. She was used to staff who fawned, flattered, or acted overly eager whenever they recognized her as the CEO of Collins Group. But Daniel, there was none of that. No pretension, no probing gaze. Just quiet professionalism. "Do you love animals?" Emma asked as she handed him the leashes. "I believe loving animals is the fastest way to learn how to love people." He smiled, kneeling to gently pet Max. With practiced, tender hands, Emma found herself watching him as he handled the pets. His movements were attentive and meticulous, as if he understood every breath, every little twitch of their bodies. In that fleeting moment, something unfamiliar stirred inside her. Not because of his appearance, but because of that calm presence, completely detached from the ruthless world she struggled in every day. "Max is a bit skittish around water. And Luna can be rather picky," Emma added, trying to keep the conversation going. "I think Max just needs some time to warm up. And Luna... Well, a lady's allowed to be particular," Daniel said with a soft chuckle, his eyes glinting playfully. For the next hour, as Daniel carefully worked in the grooming room behind a glass window, Emma sat in the waiting area, sipping chamomile tea brought by the staff. Her eyes kept drifting to the room where Daniel meticulously brushed fur, examined skin, cleaned ears, and trimmed nails, every motion smooth and precise, like a silent, gentle symphony. When everything was done, Max wagged his tail excitedly, while Luna rubbed her head against Emma's hand, a rare gesture of approval from the usually aloof feline. "Thank you, Daniel. I'm very impressed today," Emma said as she stood. "Caring for pets isn't a job," Daniel replied. "It's an exchange of trust." Emma smiled lightly, though a spark of curiosity flickered inside her. A pet spa worker speaking like a philosopher? That only intrigued her more. "I suppose I'll be visiting more often," Emma said as she prepared to leave. "I'll gladly welcome Max and Luna whenever they need," Daniel replied as her car slowly pulled away from Blossom Haven. Emma kept replaying his words, exchange of trust. It had been a long time since she met someone she couldn't immediately read, and she knew this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, after several visits where Daniel cared for Max and Luna at Blossom Haven, Emma found herself increasingly drawn to him, a kind of man she had never encountered before. No flattery, no pretense, no ulterior motives, yet carrying an inexplicable charm born from his calm and steady presence. And then the controlling, calculating side of the powerful CEO inside Emma stirred. That day, as Daniel finished tending to Max and Luna, she approached him. "Daniel, I have a proposition," she said. Looking directly into his eyes, her tone both straightforward and subtly testing, Daniel raised an eyebrow, maintaining his usual composed demeanor. "What kind of proposition, Miss Collins?" "We're going to play a little game." Emma crossed her arms and leaned slightly on the sofa, her gaze full of challenge. No strings attached, just one night for fun. In return, I'll personally fund a brand new Blossom Haven branch for you, right in the heart of Manhattan's busiest commercial district. A business opportunity anyone would dream of. Daniel paused for a few seconds before answering, his voice calm and deliberate. "Are you talking business, or are you trying to buy a person?" Emma hesitated for a brief moment at his sharp response. "I'm offering you a fast track to a life most people only fantasize about." "No one says no to an offer like this, Daniel." Daniel stood up, calmly packing his tools, his eyes losing the playful spark they usually carried. "Many might not say no, but I do." "Why?" "Everyone has a price." Emma's voice hardened, almost challenging. Daniel looked her straight in the eye, steady and firm. "I don't sell myself. Not at any price." Without another word, Daniel politely nodded and walked out of the apartment, leaving Emma standing there for the first time in her life, tasting what it meant to be flatly rejected. Days later, a short video, secretly recorded by a shop employee capturing part of their heated conversation, was suddenly leaked online. The media quickly seized the story. Sensational headlines followed. Collins Group's CEO bluntly rejected by pet spa workers' $1 million one-night offer. New York's real estate queen gets shut down for the first time. Social media exploded with mockery and ridicule aimed at Emma. And it was precisely this public relations nightmare that drove Emma, fueled by both anger and curiosity, to dig deeper into Daniel. But all she could gather from Matthew Reed, the store owner, was a single piece of information. Daniel used to be the heir of a very powerful family, Harper Holdings. I'm sure you've heard of it. From that moment, the power game Emma thought she was controlling quietly began, pulling her into a much larger vortex. After the scandal of being rejected and becoming the subject of ridicule across social media, Emma Collins should have been furious. She should have cut off all contact with Daniel Harper. But strangely, it was exactly his calm demeanor, unwavering conviction, and his steady refusal that only fueled her curiosity. Perhaps because, for the first time in years, someone had dared to say no to her, a CEO who had controlled countless multi-million-dollar deals. Emma decided not to give up. A week after the scandal, Emma contacted Blossom Haven directly, this time not for Max or Luna. "Hello, Blossom Haven. This is Emma Collins." "Hello, Ms. Collins," the receptionist answered, sounding a bit flustered. After the incident, everyone at the store knew exactly who she was. "I'd like to sign up for your at-home plant care service. My apartment balcony has a few pots of geraniums, lavender, and miniature strawberries that aren't doing well. I want your best person to come evaluate and provide routine care." The receptionist hesitated briefly before responding. "Of course, ma'am. We'll make the arrangements." Emma had calculated carefully. The plant care service was handled by Daniel. If he refused a one-night proposition, then this time she would approach him through something he loved. Plants. The next morning, the doorbell rang. And just as she predicted, the man standing at the door of her luxurious apartment at Parkview Residence was Daniel Harper. That same calm gaze, that same even, steady voice. "Good morning, Ms. Collins." "Hello, Daniel," Emma smiled, doing her best to sound natural, as if nothing had ever happened between them. Daniel set down his toolbox and glanced toward the balcony. "I heard your little garden needs some help." "Exactly." Emma stepped ahead, leading the way. "I guess I don't have much of a green thumb, but I do enjoy watching things grow." "A bit of a contradiction, isn't it?" Daniel simply smiled, offering no comment. He crouched down, examining each plant, testing the soil with his fingers, trimming wilted leaves and misting the foliage with careful, gentle movements like an artist at work. Emma stood behind him, arms crossed, quietly observing every move Daniel made was precise and thoughtful, as if each leaf carried its own soul. So different from the cold billion-dollar contracts of her world. "Daniel, ... Emma broke the silence after a few minutes. "I'm not really used to being rejected." Daniel didn't look up, still focused on the small patch of soil, but his voice came evenly. "I'm not used to seeing people believe everything has a price." His response left Emma momentarily speechless. But instead of being angry, she found herself intrigued. "Well then, this time I'm not putting any price on it. I just want my balcony to look greener." Daniel finally looked up, locking eyes with her for the first time since the scandal. "If you truly want your plants to thrive, the first thing you need ... is patience." Emma was caught slightly off guard, but she chuckled softly. "Maybe that's something I should start learning." From that day forward, Daniel began visiting Emma's apartment twice a week to care for her balcony garden. With each visit, the atmosphere between them grew more relaxed, though a certain distance remained. No more tests, no more ambiguous propositions. Just small conversations about plants, pets, and occasionally bits of personal stories. Emma gradually realized Daniel was unlike any man of power she had ever encountered. He made no effort to impress, never asked about her status or wealth, never even hinted at her being the CEO of Collins Group. And that made her even more drawn to him. One afternoon, while Daniel was trimming the lavender vines, Emma stood beside him and asked softly, "Daniel, why would someone like you choose this line of work? Caring for plants, for pets?" Daniel looked up briefly, a hint of a knowing smile in his eyes. "Because sometimes what you're best at isn't always what makes you happiest." Emma gazed at him for a long moment. In that instant, she was certain behind Daniel was a much longer story he was still keeping hidden, and she began to understand. If she wanted to reach this man's heart, she would need the same kind of patience he used while tending the plants. On her balcony, that seemingly calm routine continued for several more weeks. Regular plant care visits, scattered conversations about fertilizer, humidity, pruning methods, or simply sitting quietly together on the balcony surrounded by greenery. Neither of them would admit it, but both Emma and Daniel could feel something quietly growing between them. Subtle, but undeniable. That day, after Daniel finished checking the strawberry trellis he had recently planted for Emma, she unexpectedly invited him to stay a little longer. "I just brewed some tea from the mint leaves on the balcony. Would you like to try it?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They sat across from each other at the small balcony table. Above them, newly bloomed climbing flowers sparkled under the early autumn sun. In the distance, the city skyline loomed. But where they sat felt detached from all the noise and chaos. After a few minutes of silence, Emma was the first to speak. "I tried to learn more about you." Daniel raised an eyebrow, but his gaze remained calm, I figured. "What frustrates me is that the more I looked, the less I found. You have almost no online presence, while everyone else does. Except for one piece of information I heard from Mr. Matthew used to be the heir of Harper Holdings." Daniel gently placed his teacup down on the table. His eyes darkened, showing a hint of heaviness for the first time. Ms. Collins. Emma, if you truly want to know, then perhaps it's time I tell you. Emma nodded, sitting up straighter, listening intently. Daniel took a deep breath. My grandfather, William Harper, was the founder of Harper Holdings, a family empire that spanned real estate, finance, and energy. From a young age, both my younger brother Nathan and I were raised and groomed to one day inherit that empire. He paused for a moment, as if swallowing something hard before continuing. But unlike Nathan, I realized early on that I wasn't suited for it. I loved animals, plants, and simple living. Nathan, on the other hand, was ambitious, sharp, and everything the business world wanted. Emma noticed Daniel's hands, slightly trembling as he spoke about his brother. When my grandfather fell ill and the will remained unfinished, the family fell into chaos. My uncle Victor Harper began manipulating and recruiting weaker family members to his side, trying to seize control. Nathan was the only one brave enough to stand against him. Daniel looked up, his deep brown eyes filled with a hidden sorrow. My brother fought with all his passion and naivety. The more he resisted, the greater the pressure. Backdoor power plays, veiled threats, psychological warfare. In the end, Nathan couldn't bear it anymore. He swallowed hard. 3 years ago, Nathan took his own life. Emma reached out, gently squeezing Daniel's hand, her eyes glistening. Daniel forced a faint, bittersweet smile. After that day, I knew I couldn't continue living in that false world. I left it all behind with nothing but the clothes on my back. A few months later, I happened to reconnect with Mr. Matthew, longtime friend of my parents. He smiled softly as he mentioned Matthew. Back then, Blossom Haven was on the verge of shutting down. I helped restructure the business, expanding into plants and pet care like it is today. In return, Mr. Matthew gave me a roof over my head and worked to do things money never really gave me before. Emma whispered, "And your parents?" They stepped away from the power game long ago. They live in the countryside now, on a small farm in Vermont. They raise sheep and goats and grow organic strawberries and tomatoes. That's real happiness. Daniel looked Emma directly in the eyes. And that's also why, that day, I turned down your proposition. Emma bit her lip, feeling a sudden sting in her chest. Daniel continued, his voice no longer accusatory, but honest, because I've seen firsthand how some things, once traded for money, end up costing you yourself. Emma was speechless. For the first time in her life, having climbed to the top of the power ladder, she felt like someone had just taught her a lesson in dignity that money could never buy. As Daniel stood up to leave, Emma called out, "Thank you for sharing. Truly, thank you." Daniel smiled for the first time that evening. "Actually, I feel much lighter today, too." And for the first time, after many weeks of interaction, their conversations were no longer just small talk. Something deeper, far more profonde had quietly begun to blossom. As autumn reached its peak in New York City, the trees in Central Park turned brilliant shades of orange and red. But inside the Collins Group office, the atmosphere was more tense and suffocating than ever. Emma Collins hurried into the conference room, clutching a thick stack of documents, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Julia, give me a progress report on the preparations for tomorrow morning's meeting with the Japanese investors. All financial documents are ready." "But there's an issue," Julia said quietly, hesitating. Emma frowned. She hated sentences that started like that. "What issue?" "The Japanese interpreter called in sick this morning. High fever, hospitalized." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. This group of Japanese investors wasn't just bringing in $25 million of capital. It was Collins Group's gateway into the Asian market. The deal Emma had been pursuing for over 6 months. "Call the other translation agencies immediately," Emma ordered. "I've already contacted the 3 most reputable agencies in New York, But because of the short notice, the weekend, and the financial technicalities involved, we haven't found anyone suitable yet. Emma tightened her grip on the documents. She felt like she was burning inside. At that very moment, down in the lobby of Collins Group, Daniel Harper was delivering a few pots of lavender and mint from an order Emma had placed the previous week. As he waited for the elevator, he happened to spot Julia rushing by, her face full of anxiety. "Good afternoon, Julia." Daniel greeted with a small nod. Julia was surprised, but returned the nod, unable to hide her tension. "I'm sorry, it's really not a good time right now. Is something wrong?" Daniel asked, his eyes calmly observant. Julia sighed. "We have a meeting with Japanese investors tomorrow. Our interpreter was just hospitalized, and now?" She paused, suddenly realizing she was venting to the plant guy. But Daniel continued, unfazed. "Are they speaking formal Japanese or business dialect?" Julia blinked. "Formal. They're government representatives." "But why to speak Japanese? I lived in Tokyo for nearly 2 years." Julia stared at him, completely shocked. After a brief hesitation, she immediately called Emma. 10 minutes later, on the 21st floor, Daniel entered Emma's conference room in a crisp white dress shirt. He looked entirely different from his usual self-sharper, more polished enough to make Emma do a double take. "I almost didn't recognize you," she blurted out. Daniel smiled softly. "Every environment requires a different version of yourself." Emma nodded, handing him a stack of documents. "We've got about 2 hours to go through everything before the meeting." Throughout the review session, Emma couldn't take her eyes off Daniel. He didn't just translate the technical terms smoothly, he deeply understood the cultural nuances needed to win over Japanese partners. Humility, long-term vision, honor-bound promises, and social responsibility. At several points, Daniel even suggested rephrasing and restructuring parts of the presentation to avoid sounding too aggressive, something that would be a major misstep in Japanese business culture. "You really have experience in this field, don't you?" Emma asked during a short break. "I was trained to be Harper Holdings' successor, remember?" Daniel replied calmly. "Japanese, French, Mandarin, they were mandatory for any international heir." Emma stared at him for a long moment. Once again, Daniel's carefully hidden past resurfaced not as a wound, but as an undeniable piece of his identity. The next morning, the official meeting began. The Japanese delegation arrived promptly, their demeanor serious and composed. Daniel entered the conference room like he belonged there, confident, professional, effortlessly controlling the room's rhythm. He wasn't just an interpreter. He was managing the tone of the entire negotiation, softening language where needed, clarifying subtle cultural points, and preventing any potential misunderstandings. Emma only had to focus on the strategic content. Daniel handled the connections. When the meeting concluded, Mr. Takahashi, head of the Japanese delegation, shook Emma's hand, then turned to Daniel with a smile. "He's not just a translator. He understands the soul of negotiation." After the investors left, Emma turned to Daniel. "I honestly don't even know how to thank you." Daniel simply replied, "I'm just reusing old skills. But this time, for something far more worthwhile." Emma looked at him, feeling something stir inside. The man who once rejected her $1 million offer had just saved her $25 million deal. As Daniel was about to leave, Emma called out, "Daniel." He turned, his gaze calm. "I owe you a dinner. No strings, no hidden motives, just thank you." Daniel smiled gently, his first true softness breaking through. "Then I'll accept, but under one condition." "What condition?" "You cook. I've heard the great CEO Collins has a kitchen that's never been used." Emma laughed, feeling lighter as if shedding another layer of armor. "Deal. A homemade dinner from me." And for the first time between them, It was no longer a power game. It was something real and deeply human. In the weeks following their first dinner, something had undeniably shifted between Daniel and Emma. They still met regularly because of the plants on her balcony or Max and Luna. But now, every conversation carried a quiet warmth, a growing closeness. Emma never tried to rush the relationship. She understood Daniel. This was a man who only trusted things that grew slowly and naturally. Just like the way he patiently tended to every small sprout on her balcony. One afternoon, while Daniel was adjusting the purple geranium trellis, Emma received a call from her assistant, Julia. "Emma, I just got a meeting request from ... Victor Harper." Emma froze, instinctively glancing at Daniel. "Daniel's uncle." "Yes. He says it concerns your best interests." Emma tightened her grip on the phone, thinking for a few seconds. "Arrange it. Tomorrow afternoon." After hanging up, she turned to Daniel. He was still tending to the plants, as if he hadn't heard anything, but his eyes darkened the moment she said, "Daniel, your uncle reached out to me." For the first time since they met, Emma saw something flash across Daniel's eyes, a mixture of caution and deep pain. "Be careful with him. I want to hear directly from him. But, is there anything you want to tell me first?" Daniel paused, then looked straight into her eyes. "Emma, Uncle Victor is the reason my family was destroyed." His voice lowered, as though reliving old wounds. "When my grandfather fell ill, Victor quietly began manipulating different branches of the company, funneling shady investments into Harper Holdings. Nathan, my younger brother, discovered the financial irregularities and tried to fight back. But the deeper he investigated, the more trapped he became." Daniel took a breath, his voice catching slightly. "Victor started applying pressure, financial threats, attacks on Nathan's reputation, and eventually psychological torment. In the end, Nathan broke." Emma squeezed Daniel's hand, her heart aching. His voice trembled. "After Nathan's death, I knew if I stayed, I'd be the next victim. I left everything behind, cut all ties, and started over from nothing." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Victor doesn't just want to control Harper Holdings. He wants to wipe out anyone who could stand in his way." Emma understood. The man she was about to meet wasn't just an ordinary businessman, but someone powerful, ruthless, and willing to crush anyone in his path. The next afternoon, at a luxury restaurant in Midtown, Emma walked into the private VIP room where the meeting had been arranged. Waiting for her was a man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a perfectly tailored gray suit. His sharp eyes radiated cold calculation. "Victor Harper, Daniel's uncle. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Collins," he said, with a thin smile. Emma took her seat, meeting his gaze head-on. "I assume you didn't invite me here for small talk." Victor raised his wineglass and took a small sip. "Indeed. I'll be direct. You're getting involved in something far more dangerous than you realize. If you're referring to Daniel, then you're wasting your breath." Victor narrowed his eyes slightly, his tone dripping with hidden meaning. "You know Daniel was once the direct heir to Harper Holdings. But do you know the legal baggage he carries from his years in hiding?" Emma replied coldly. "I know he walked away from his fortune to escape the very power games you're playing." Victor chuckled. "Naive, don't let your emotions cloud your judgment, Ms. Collins. He ran because he was scared, because he knew that if he stayed, Harper Holdings' financial scandals would eventually drag him down." Emma kept her composure. "So what is it you want from me?" Victor leaned back, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "You're the CEO of Collins Group, a company rapidly expanding. I want to invest in your company. With Harper Holdings' abundant capital, I could easily double Collins Group's value." Emma raised an eyebrow, and in return, Victor tilted his head slightly, lowering his voice. "Simple. Stay away from my nephew. Let Daniel remain where he is, a small-time plant caretaker. If you do that, I won't dig any deeper into his past. But if you don't, you know the consequences." Emma sat up straighter, her voice firm. "I don't sell my choices, and I certainly won't betray a man who walked away from an entire fortune just to keep his dignity." Victor paused for a few seconds, slightly caught off guard. Emma continued, "I won't partner with anyone who values power more than family." Their gazes locked like two sharp blades crossing. Victor stood, leaving her with one final warning. "You'll regret your stubbornness." Emma simply smiled. "We'll see." That night, Emma told Daniel everything about the meeting under the soft balcony lights. His face was quiet boo. In the days following Emma's meeting with Victor Harper, a growing sense of unease began creeping into Colin's group. On the surface, everything still ran smoothly. But Emma could feel that something was shifting quietly beneath. Daniel continued visiting her apartment as usual. He cared for the plants, played with Max and Luna, and even cooked simple meals for Emma when she returned late from work. But behind his calm eyes, Emma sensed a deepening restlessness. One evening, just after Daniel had finished trimming the strawberry trellis, Emma's phone rang. It was Julia, her assistant, sounding anxious. "Emma, we've got a serious problem." "What is it?" "3 strategic partners just simultaneously submitted notices to suspend collaboration with Colin's Group. 2 banks have declined to process our expansion loans, citing increased financial risk." Emma was silent for a moment. "All in one day, yes. And there are internal rumors that the federal tax department is preparing to audit our financial records." Daniel stood beside her, his expression gradually darkening. He said nothing, quietly listening to the entire conversation. After hanging up, Emma exhaled deeply and looked at Daniel. "He's starting." Daniel nodded slightly. Victor rarely acts directly. He creates psychological pressure, first spreading doubt, inciting panic from within. When the internal collapse begins, that's when he swoops in with bailout, offers making himself look like the savior. Emma let out a dry laugh. Classic manipulation tactics. Daniel slowly sat down on the balcony chair across from her. "Emma, you can still walk away. If you accept Victor's offer to collaborate, you can save Colin's Group without suffering any more losses." Emma stared at him, her voice steady but firm. "Daniel, if you had sold yourself for an attractive offer that first day, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now." Daniel fell silent. He knew she was right, Emma continued, this time reaching for his hand for the first time. "I'm choosing to stand beside you no matter how rough the road ahead may be." Daniel gently squeezed her hand. "Then, it's time. I can't keep running." Emma looked into his eyes. Daniel inhaled deeply. His gaze filled with a new sense of resolve. "I need to return to the game Victor is playing." "What do you mean?" "Victor may control the system, but he still fears exposure. If I can gather enough evidence on the money laundering, internal price manipulation, and stock rigging he's been covering up for years, I can force him to retreat." Emma frowned. "But how can you even access the system now?" Daniel replied slowly. "There are still a few people loyal to my grandfather and my parents. They've quietly helped me conceal my identity these past few years. But if I reach out, they may open a door back into Harper Holdings' financial systems." Emma's concern deepened. "But that's incredibly dangerous, Daniel. You'd be stepping directly into Victor's crosshairs." Daniel smiled gently. His eyes filled with firm determination for the first time. "I've been running long enough." The next day, Daniel began arranging secret meetings. He contacted Richard Shaw, Harper Holdings' former senior legal advisor, once his grandfather William Harper's most trusted right-hand man. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, where no one would pay attention. Richard, now in his early 60s, looked at Daniel with a mix of surprise and relief. "You're really ready to come back, Daniel?" Daniel nodded. For Nathan. For my family. And this time? For the woman who believes in me, Richard sighed. Victor's stronger than ever. He's got allies even within the investigation agencies. But if we can collect enough evidence, there's still a way. Daniel gave a faint smile. Then let's begin. Richard pulled out a folder containing a list of shady investment funds Victor controlled through shell companies in Singapore, the Cayman Islands, and Zurich. This is Victor's biggest vulnerability. If we follow this trail, he won't have an escape route. Daniel nodded, his eyes turning cold. Then we'll follow the money. That night, back at Emma's apartment, Daniel shared the entire plan with her. Emma listened silently. Her eyes filled with both worry and pride. You're not the same Daniel who once tended my plants, she whispered. Daniel took her hand. His voice warm and steady. I'm still your Daniel. The only difference is that this time, I'm using everything I've learned to compete, but to protect. Emma smiled, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Then let's move forward together, Daniel, no matter how many storms lie ahead. They gripped each other's hands beneath the balcony lights, where the tiny strawberry sprouts continued growing quietly, just like their unwavering hope for tomorrow. The next 2 weeks passed like a silent battlefield. Daniel, together with Richard Shaw, worked relentlessly to collect documents, invoices, and hidden transactions buried deep inside Harper Holdings for years. They traced dozens of shell companies scattered across tax havens, following the intricate financial trails Victor Harper had carefully constructed. Meanwhile, at Collins Group, Emma struggled to steer the company through the financial storm Victor had unleashed. Calls from creditors, partnership terminations, and vicious rumors constantly swirled around her. And yet, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Standing beside her was a man willing to fight, not just for himself, but for both of them. Then came Victor's first real strike, calculated, brutal, and exactly as Emma had anticipated. That morning, as Emma was in a financial meeting, Julia's phone started ringing repeatedly. Her assistant's face turned pale. As she read the messages, Emma, we've got a situation. What is it? Kima asked sharply. Julia handed her a tablet. On the screen was the front page of New York's biggest financial newspaper, Collins Group CEO under money laundering investigation over Asian partnership deal. Beneath it were detailed financial records, contract scans, and confidential data only insiders could access. Emma's blood ran cold. It was a vicious blow. Victor had twisted the recent deal with the Japanese investors, the very deal Daniel had helped her close, into the center of a criminal investigation by the afternoon. Collins Group received an official summons from the Department of Justice. Accounts were temporarily frozen, pending the investigation down in the boardroom. Panic filled the air. One board member spoke up anxiously. Emma, without a bailout partner, will run out of liquidity in 3 weeks. We've already received a buyout offer. From Harper Holdings, another lawyer added, his voice carrying heavy implication. Emma bit her lip hard. Victor was forcing her hand, cornering her into surrendering the company. That evening, back at her apartment, Daniel arrived. He found Emma sitting silently on the balcony, staring out at the glittering New York skyline. I heard, Daniel said softly, sitting beside her. Emma didn't turn to face him. Her voice was tired. Things are slipping out of control, Daniel. Victor's better than I thought. Daniel placed his hand over hers, gently squeezing. That's how he's always operated. Create the problem, then show up as the savior. Emma finally turned to him, locking eyes. If I surrender, at least Collins Group will survive. But if I keep fighting, I could lose everything. Daniel paused, then answered softly but firmly. Then, let me step forward. Emma frowned. How? Daniel exhaled deeply. It's time for me to reveal my true identity. No more hiding behind Daniel Harper, the plant shop worker. Emma froze. You're reclaiming your inheritance. Now, nodded, his gaze filled with more resolve than she had ever seen. Victor holds power because no one dares to challenge him. But when the rightful heir steps forward, everything shifts. I have the legal right to demand an internal investigation and independent audits of the secret financial accounts. Emma shivered slightly. But Victor won't sit idly by. He'll fight back. You'll be in danger, Daniel. Daniel smiled, the first time. She saw the confident smile of the man who once stood atop the corporate world. Yes, but if I don't face him now, I'll be running for the rest of my life. Emma placed her hand gently on his cheek, her voice trembling. Then let me walk this road with you, no matter how rough it gets. Daniel leaned his forehead against hers, whispering, "Thank you for believing in someone like me." 3 days later, the entire financial press exploded as Richard Shaw, Daniel's legal representative, issued an official statement. Daniel Harper, son of Thomas Harper, grandson of William Harper, hereby announces his return, fully restoring his rightful inheritance. An independent audit of Harper Holdings' financial system is to commence immediately and conclude within 90 days. The headlines screamed, Harper family succession battle reaches unprecedented tension. Elsewhere, Victor Harper slammed his whiskey glass onto the floor, his cold eyes flashing with fury. Well done, Daniel. Well done. You finally show your face. Daniel had officially stepped into the arena, and this time he wasn't fighting alone anymore. The official reappearance of Daniel Harper shook New York's financial world to its core. Headlines across major media screamed, "The lost heir of Harper Holdings returns. The family war begins." International investment funds closely monitored the unfolding battle. Many neutral shareholders at Harper Holdings began to waver as Victor faced potential exposure of his hidden financial scandals. At Collins Group, though financial instability remained, Emma and Daniel had at least started to turn the tide. That evening, in Emma's apartment, they sat side by side on the balcony as usual. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but the air between them felt noticeably heavier now. Daniel held a fresh stack of documents Richard had just delivered. "Victor isn't sitting still," Daniel said quietly. "We prepared for this." Daniel nodded, though a flicker of concern crossed his eyes. Victor isn't just skilled at media manipulation. He's even better at hitting below the belt. Emma looked at him steadily. "What do you think he'll do?" Daniel replied softly, "He'll target your reputation, twist our relationship into a scandal, undermine you where you're most vulnerable, Collins Group shareholders." Emma tightened her grip on Daniel's hand. "If he dares, I'll stand before the media and tell them everything, that I was the one who pursued you, that I love. A man who gave up everything to keep his integrity." Daniel smiled gently. "You've never been afraid." "I am afraid," Emma whispered, "but I'll never fear the truth." Just as Daniel predicted, the attack came swiftly. 3 days later, a flood of scandalous headlines hit the media. Emma Collins trading her body for Harper heirs' financial protection. The secret behind Collins Group CEO's paid love dinner with Daniel Harper. The articles twisted fragments from Emma's past, including the infamous rejection, and distorted their subsequent meetings into salacious tales of Celescu's, of power, money, and sex. Anonymous accounts swarmed social media, launching coordinated smear campaigns and humiliating hashtags against Emma. That very night, Emma called for a press conference at Collins Group headquarters. In front of hundreds of reporters and flashing cameras, she appeared composed, wearing an elegant white suit. "I am not here to defend myself," she said firmly. "I have only one truth to share." She looked directly into the cameras. "I love Daniel Harper, a man who rejected every attempt I made to buy his favor." A man who walked away from his inheritance to protect his principles. A man who helped Collins Group secure major deals without asking for a single cent in return. If loving someone like him is wrong, then I am willing to face any judgment. The room fell silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, a few of Collins Group's long-standing shareholders in attendance began to applaud. By the next morning, international media outlets had picked up Emma's powerful statement, flipping public opinion and reversing the narrative. Victor had carefully orchestrated, but Victor was far from done. His next move was even more insidious. One morning, Daniel received an urgent call from Richard. Daniel. Bad news. Victor is lobbying the Harper Holdings board to hold an emergency vote to strip you of your legal inheritance rights. Daniel clenched his phone. On what grounds? They fabricated evidence claiming you were involved in money laundering through Asian investment funds during your disappearance. Daniel let out a cold laugh. Same dirty playbook. Richard spoke quickly. If you don't act now, Victor might secure enough votes to make the revocation official. That night, Emma sat beside Daniel as he organized documents for the decisive meeting ahead. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Daniel, whatever happens tomorrow, I'll still choose to stand by you. Daniel grasped her hand firmly. I'm not running anymore, Emma. I won't let Victor steal from my family one more time. Their eyes met, no longer just as lovers, but as two warriors stepping into a battle for survival. Tomorrow, the Harper family power struggle would finally reach its defining moment. That morning, the atmosphere inside Harper Holdings headquarters was thick, tense, and suffocating. On the top floor, where the board was convening, the stage was set for the final showdown between two opposing forces. Victor Harper, the embodiment of greed and old power, and Daniel Harper, the rightful heir returning after years in hiding. Inside the elevator, Emma stood beside Daniel. Her heart pounded, but her face remained composed. She knew one misstep today, and everything they had fought for would collapse. Daniel gently squeezed her hand. Today, I'm no longer fighting just for myself. You never fought alone. Emma whispered, her gaze steady, in the boardroom. Victor Harper was already seated at the head of the long table, flanked by two of his personal attorneys. Daniel, Victor sneered. Daniel calmly pulled out his chair and sat opposite him. I never left the family, Uncle. It was the family that you've twisted and corrupted for far too long. And others Victor had recruited during his years of manipulation. Acting Chairman Charles Whitmore officially opened the session today. The board convenes this emergency hearing to examine Daniel Harper's succession eligibility. Based on newly presented allegations, Victor immediately stood, his voice clear and rehearsed, as if every detail had been meticulously staged. Ladies and gentlemen, I present evidence that Daniel Harper engaged in money laundering through suspicious funds in Asia during his absence. Here are the account statements, wire transfers, and questionable investment contracts. At his signal, thick folders were distributed to each board member. All eyes turned toward Daniel. Victor allowed himself a smug smile. A man who vanished. For years now, returns to reclaim power only to reveal that, in the shadows, his crimes were far graver. The room grew oppressively heavy. Several board members began whispering to one another, visibly unsettled. Emma glanced at Daniel. Though concern flickered briefly in her eyes, he remained surprisingly calm. Just as Victor prepared to call for a vote to revoke Daniel's inheritance, Daniel rose from his seat, his voice firm and composed. I request permission to respond. Chairman Charles nodded. Granting the floor, Daniel walked to the front podium, his gaze sweeping across the familiar faces of the board. Distinguished members, for years I stayed silent, not to evade responsibility, but because I refused to participate in the dark games that have tainted the legacy my grandfather built. He held up a thinner folder, marked with official legal seals. The documents presented by Mr. Victor Harper stemmed directly from a shadowy financial network controlled by him. Our independent legal team has traced shell companies' offshore accounts and transfer pricing schemes linked to numerous fictitious funds. Turning directly to Victor, Daniel's voice sharpened. You systematically planted my name in these illicit transactions during my absence, constructing false evidence in case I ever return to claim my rightful place. He then lifted a second folder, this one containing bank records and sworn testimony from former financial officers who had once served William Harper. These are verified records exposing Mr. Victor Harper's use of Harper Holdings as a front for money laundering, stock manipulation, bribery, and various other serious financial crimes. The boardroom exploded in murmurs. Some board members gasped. Others whispered frantically with their attorneys. Many eyes now regarded Victor. With suspicion, Victor's face flushed red. He slammed his fist on the table and shot up from his seat. Lies. This is nothing but slander and desperate fabrication, Daniel answered firmly. If you are indeed innocent, then accept our proposal for an independent audit of Harper Holdings, supported by the shareholders. Victor went silent. It was a challenge he dared not accept. Chairman Charles quickly intervened. That's enough. We will reassess this hearing for 48 hours to fully review the evidence presented by both parties. As they exited the boardroom, Daniel and Emma moved briskly down the corridor. For the first time, Emma exhaled in relief. You've truly flipped the board, Daniel. Daniel gripped her hand, his eyes quietly gleaming with pride. The battle isn't over yet, but for the first time, we have a real chance to win. At the end of the hallway, Victor stood in the shadows, his glare burning into them because he now knew the corrupt empire he had carefully constructed for years was finally beginning to crumble. 2 days passed, strung tighter than a bowstring, for 48 tense hours. Independent audit teams worked around the clock to comb through Harper Holdings' entire financial system. Doors that had remained sealed for nearly a decade were finally pried open under layers of cross-stash examination. Emma stood firmly by Daniel's side through every emergency meeting, every grueling cross-examination. Even as they faced the dirtiest schemes, neither wavered for a moment. On the third morning, the board reconvened. The room was deathly silent as Chairman Charles Whitmore stood to announce the audit's findings. Ladies and gentlemen, thorough investigation, we have uncovered a series of serious financial violations directly tied to Mr. Victor Harper. These include the creation of internal slush funds, illicit transfers through shell corporations, international tax fraud, stock manipulation, and bribery of foreign officials. He paused briefly, his gaze heavy as it fell on Victor. With irrefutable evidence presented, the board has unanimously voted to suspend Mr. Victor Harper from all executive roles effective immediately. All files have been forwarded to federal prosecutors for investigation under federal law. The boardroom erupted into a flurry of whispers. Victor sat frozen in his chair. His face went pale, lips pressed into a tight line, his eyes still unable to comprehend how the empire he had spent nearly 20 years building had crumbled within weeks. Daniel stood and spoke firmly, his voice cutting through the noise as the rightful heir to William Harper's legacy. I accept full responsibility to restore Harper Holdings. I vow to restructure the company under the ethical business principles my grandfather established from the very beginning. Applause broke out across the room. Several elderly shareholders rose, tears brimming in their eyes, finally witnessing light after years trapped in the dark vortex of manipulation. After the decisive meeting, Victor was quietly escorted out of the building. On the balcony of Harper Holdings, Daniel stood silently, gazing out at the sea of people below. His expression was a mixture of relief and sorrow, as though the shackles of the past had finally broken. but not without scars for everything his family had lost. Emma approached from behind and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Daniel." Daniel turned, looking deep into her eyes. "No, Emma. This is only the beginning." 3 months later, Harper Holdings had undergone a complete transformation under Daniel's leadership. He initiated sweeping reforms, dismantling shady subsidiaries, cutting all unethical financial ties, and refocusing on the core industries that William Harper had once built from the ground up. Collins Group also recovered rapidly from its financial crisis, fueled by new, legitimate investments from Harper Holdings. This time, transparent, clean, and guided by true partnership. The media dubbed Daniel the heir with a healing heart of the Harper Empire, and Emma for her unwavering courage and resilience was praised as the Iron CEO who defended her company's honor in the dirtiest financial storm. That evening, under New York's glittering night sky, Daniel invited Emma to a small countryside estate, where his parents had settled after leaving behind the ruthless corporate world. The quaint farm was filled with strawberry fields, tomato vines, and lavender beds that Daniel and his parents had tended together. Max and Luna, their loyal four-legged companions, ran freely across the familiar garden. Emma smiled as she looked around. "It's so peaceful." Daniel held her hand, his eyes filled with a deep sincerity unlike any she had ever seen. "Emma, if you hadn't believed in me that day, none of this would exist." Emma chuckled softly. "And if you had accepted my one-night proposition back then, we might have never made it here." They both laughed, their eyes warm and tender. Daniel paused, his gaze glistening. "There's a question I've been holding on to for quite some time, and I believe tonight is the right moment." From his pocket, he pulled out a simple yet elegant diamond ring, the blue sapphire gleaming under the moonlight. Daniel knelt down in the quiet garden, a place where every storm had finally passed. "Emma Collins, will you rebuild everything with me? Plant new seeds for the rest of our lives. Be my wife, my partner, with no contracts, no conditions, no power plays, only pure love between us." Tears silently streamed down Emma's cheeks as she leaned down and whispered, "Yes." Daniel stood and embraced her tightly amidst the lavender, their hearts finally finding peace. High above, the stars quietly bore witness to the moment. To people who once seemed destined never to belong together, had now found their home in each other's hearts. And for the first time after years of turmoil, Daniel smiled, a true smile of a man who had conquered both fate and himself. After months of rebuilding Harper Holdings, Daniel decided to give Emma one special day. No meetings, no press, no shareholders, just the two of them, and the roots of where it all began. The car left the city at dawn, winding through peaceful country roads. Birch trees swayed gently. In the wind, strawberry fields sparkled under the morning sun. Emma sat beside him, gazing out the window, her heart light. It was her first time seeing the place Daniel always called his family's true sanctuary. "It's beautiful, ... she whispered. Daniel smiled, placing his hand gently over hers. "My parents moved here after leaving Harper Holdings. Power, no battles, just plants, animals, and themselves." The car stopped at the gates of a modest hillside farm. A wooden sign read, "Blossom Haven Farm, where everything is planted anew." Emma chuckled at the familiar, meaningful name. Daniel opened her door, and the fresh, grassy air immediately swept over them. Waiting on the porch were Daniel's parents. "I'm home." Daniel smiled brightly as he rushed to embrace his mother. His mother, Margaret, a kind woman with warm, gentle eyes, and his father, Thomas, with the firm handshake of a man who had seen both the heights and depths of business. Daniel turned, holding Emma's hand. "This is Emma, the woman I've told you so much about." Margaret stepped forward and embraced Emma tenderly. "Welcome, dear. This is the place Daniel truly calls home. Emma froze for a moment, never having heard anyone call her that before. She smiled, her eyes misty. Thank you. This is the first time I've truly felt like I'm stepping into a family. That afternoon, they gathered around a long wooden table on the porch, sharing a simple yet delicious meal: freshly picked strawberries, sweet cherry tomatoes, homegrown vegetable salad, and a pie baked by Margaret herself. Max and Luna ran playfully around the garden as though they had belonged here all along. Daniel showed Emma the small garden behind the house, where Thomas grew herbs, and Margaret raised a flock of sheep and a few adorable alpacas. Whenever the world out there becomes too loud, I return here, Daniel said, his voice quiet and warm. Emma gently squeezed his hand. Next time you come here to escape the storm, don't forget to bring me with you. Daniel looked at her, smiling softly. There won't be a next time alone anymore. I believe this place will soon be home for both of us. Emma smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. In that moment, she saw Daniel fully not as the privileged heir, nor the humble man who once tended her balcony plants, but as someone strong enough to walk away from the world, and brave enough to rise again and fight for them both. And so, their story gently comes to a close, not with grand victories, but with quiet hearts finally finding peace. Perhaps life doesn't always reward those who chase power, but those who dare to protect what truly matters. If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Snail Story to join us for more heartfelt journeys, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the stories waiting ahead. See you in the next chapter.